Hello everybody and welcome to Guild Wars 2 Daily. So today, before we jump into the lore stuff, the lore questions, I just want to address one thing that I said yesterday that actually I was completely wrong about, and a lot of people pointed it out, and you're very, very correct. With the microtransactions things, I mentioned that the fact that players can now buy these gems with gold actually turn the system into a gold sink. And no, that's not necessarily true at all, because that gold that you would then be giving to another player isn't actually being removed from the game. That's still there. Of course, there's an assumption there, which is kind of what I was going on, that the person selling the gems wants the gold for something, which does imply that it will then be destroyed in a different sink. But of course that means that this gem system itself isn't a sink. And actually it does raise something quite worrying, because it raises the possibility that if nobody wants to spend their gold on anything other than gems, or if there's not much desire from people to spend their gold because they'd rather be spending their karma, or they'd rather be spending influence or using other currencies, if people don't want to spend their gold that much, that may mean that there is a lot of inflation in the game. There do definitely need to be some good gold sinks there. So we could be in a situation, really, a worrying situation, where because of this gem system in the game, Guild Wars 2 is going to really need to make sure it has some good, solid gold sinks, because otherwise, in like 2 years' time, new players are going to feel like it costs an extortionate amount to buy gems because there's going to be so much inflation with the gold, and that's really all gold's going towards. And we don't want that to happen, because then people are definitely going to feel like it's an unreasonable task to acquire these things through the in-game currency, and feel like ArenaNet are being unfair about the price of gems in the game. So yeah, I can actually see a problem there, really. But I did want to raise the point. A lot of, as I said, loads and loads of comments about it yesterday. I'll hold my hands up. I'm not Superman. I'll be wrong every now and then. But yeah, generally those are my thoughts on the gem system. We'll get onto it more, but this is a lore episode. Let's jump into the questions. I've got 3 questions, but they only come in from 2 different people. One of these people's questions was really good and kind of split in 2. So we'll just read out the first one here, which comes in from DBZM1K3. Gotta love YouTube usernames. Who says, do the races in Guild Wars 2 not know about the Bloodstones? And if they do, why haven't the Bloodstones been tapped into to help fight the Elder Dragons? Which is a really, really good question, because this is on a topic that was established in Guild Wars 1, but we haven't really heard anything about when it comes to Guild Wars 2. So I figured this would be quite a nice opportunity to talk to you guys, if you might not know, about the story of the Bloodstone, and then actually answer the question. So the story of the Bloodstone goes something like this. A long time ago, one of the human gods decided to give the races of Tyria, the races that existed on the world, magic. The specific races that were given the magic from the gods, we don't know. We don't know exactly which ones had it. We do know that the humans were one of them, and I think it's pretty safe to say, we can all pretty much agree, that a lot of the wildlife and things you find around the world of Tyria probably got their magic from this source as well. Unfortunately, giving everyone magic in this way, instead of easing everyone's life and causing some kind of worldwide peace, it did the complete opposite. It caused all the races of the world, and in particular the humans, to start warring with one another. And not just warring in a conventional way, but warring with very, very powerful magic, and they were devastating each other, wiping each other out in massive numbers, and it was complete chaos. So one human, this man called King Doric, decided, hey, we've got to put a stop to this. So he went on a long pilgrimage to the city where the gods were living, and he begged to the gods, please, you've got to do something about it. You've got to take this magic away. So the gods responded, not by taking magic away completely, but they essentially partitioned it off. They made it so that one individual couldn't have access to all the magic that gods had bestowed to the races of the world. And by partitioning things like this, they brought a lot more stability to the world. The way they did this, though, was through these things called the Bloodstones. Essentially, the lore is quite sketchy. It's not 100% in full. In fact, this is one of those topics that I talk a lot about on my channel, how really I would love Guild Wars 2 to go into more detail about, because really at the moment they're very mysterious and a bit blotchy, the way that the lore is ordered out. It seems like this lore was initially written as an explanation for why the game had separate professions. The idea was that you couldn't be all professions at once because of these things, these Bloodstones. Anyway, there are 5 Bloodstones, and these are essentially pieces of what was once one big Bloodstone. So I guess the idea is that when the gods gave magic to the races, they did it through having this whole Bloodstone. And when they partitioned the magic off, essentially they broke this into little pieces. 4 of those pieces essentially represent 4 different schools of magic, and the 5th one is called a keystone, which is in legend supposed to be the one that will bring the Bloodstone back together. Why the gods would manufacture it to do that, I don't know. They really don't explain very much about it, but this was essentially the idea. You have these pieces of the Bloodstone, or known as Bloodstones in and of themselves, scattered around the world. During Prophecies, the Bloodstones did feature heavily. We found out about a race that existed on Tyria long before the gods, and in fact were using magic that predated the gods, and they were actually manipulating these Bloodstones to keep something called the Door of Kamali shut, which was this dangerous place. It was a portal to another realm, and they were essentially keeping these evil demons from getting out onto the world. And these people, the Massart, were using the Bloodstones to power this big gate to keep it shut. Aside from that, we really didn't hear much else about what the Bloodstones were being used for in modern Tyria, and further, we don't know very much about what the races of the world know about the Bloodstones themselves. I mean, it was all human perspective in Guild Wars 1, and it certainly didn't strike me that the humans knew that much about the Bloodstones. However, other races did seem to know a lot. It raises a lot of questions, like, for instance, why do the Massart, who were not brought to Tyria by the gods like the humans were, and didn't get their magic from the gods necessarily like the humans were, how comes the Massart know how to manipulate the Bloodstones to a greater extent than perhaps the humans do? And what does this mean about the other races that we can play as in Guild Wars 2, like the Asura, the Norn, the Char? The Char in particular is quite interesting because we've had it confirmed that the Char predate the humans and thus also predate the human gods on Tyria, which also may mean that the Char had their own magic before the gods came and started interfering with things. So do these ancient races, like the Char, like the Dwarves who are now extinct, do they know that much about the Bloodstones? Did the gods even bring the Bloodstones with them to Tyria when they came to the planet? I mean, we don't know. Did they just find the Bloodstones there? And going back to your question, why don't the races of this day and age use them to fight the Elder Dragons? Well, we don't know. Maybe they will. Maybe this will be a really cool part of the storyline, and I actually think this would be a really interesting twist to go on. Maybe it was that the gods came to Tyria, found the Bloodstones there that were already existing, and learned themselves how to manipulate them. But perhaps the Bloodstones themselves are just channeling magic from the dragons that are already on Tyria. I mean, we've got 5 Bloodstones and we've got 5 dragons. It might be a bit of a stretch to say that they're linked in that way, but it's definitely a possibility. And if it does turn out to be something similar to that, then yes, I think that would be a great way for the storyline to develop, that we're going to have to defeat these Elder Dragons by learning the true nature of the Bloodstones. This part of lore, this is a big part of lore that was established really when Prophecies, when Guild Wars first came out, has not really been elaborated on in all these years, and I'm very much looking forward to see what Guild Wars 2 does with the Bloodstones, because I do think they're a very mysterious and very cool part of the story, and we definitely are due for learning a bit more about them. It's very cool. Do you guys have any theories on this kind of stuff? When we get to certain topics like this that we'll be talking about, where we don't have much information, the best we can really do is speculate. So I'd love to hear what some of your theories are if you have them. Okay, so the second 2 questions, as I said earlier, come in from the same guy. So it's a bit of a double whammy. This comes in from Gabareko2, who says, a while ago, my friend asked me, how many worlds are there in Tyria? I thought about it, but all that got to my mind was the Mists and the Underworld. But it's not like they're different planets. They're more ethereal realms. So my 2 questions are, what is the origin of each race, and how many worlds are there in the universe of Guild Wars? This is really good. This is something that's always quite interested me. So in Guild Wars 1, it was established you had Tyria. You have the planet that the game was set on, and this is also the planet that Guild Wars 2 is set on. We have never seen the full size of this planet, so we don't know how much of the continents that we've explored on actually make up of the planet as a whole. In Guild Wars 2, there are some globes around, but they're cunningly concealed in all the areas that don't show land masses we already know exist, so we don't really have a very good idea of how big Tyria is. Well, you can roughly estimate from these globes, but these are the kinds of things that are always subject to change. However, we do know that Tyria exists as a planet that orbits a sun and has a moon of its own. We know these things. We also know that Tyria exists in a universe that is surrounded by something called the Mists, which is essentially a really magical, mystical, parallel realm that all encompasses everything within the known universe of Guild Wars. And it's said that by travelling through those mists, you can find other worlds and realms. Some of those we did actually find in the first game. For example, you could speak to the gods who would take you to the Underworld and the Fissure of Woe. These were realms that the gods belonged in themselves, and you could go to them. These were alternate realms within the Mists. But there's also talk of other worlds. We've never actually seen any of these other worlds. We know that there is a real physical universe out there in Tyria. You can see stars in the sky. You can see the moon there. You can see the Tyrian sun. They're all there. We haven't really had much lore about them, but there is definitely a physical universe, as well as a more magical magical, as you say, ethereal universe on top of that too. Exactly how the two relate to each other is very interesting. I wonder whether you could leave Tyria, for example, on an Asuran-made rocket and fly out for years and years and years and years and eventually find another physical world. Now, would that world you just found, that physical world within the physical universe, be what are considered other worlds you could have travelled to if you'd gone through the mists by some magical means? Is that what they're talking about? Or are these completely separate things? Are the worlds that you can find through exploring the mists completely different to worlds that can be explored by travelling through the physical universe? We don't know, and the writers of the game certainly haven't really talked about this connection that much themselves. We just have throwaway lore that talks about other worlds existing. I think it's good that there are these open doors within the story. I very much like the idea that, let's say, Guild Wars 2 does amazing and it sparks off a huge franchise for whatever reason. Loads of different game developers start creating games for it. You could then have all these different worlds that are perhaps at different levels of technological advancements, and some of them are fantasy games, some of them could be shooters. You just don't know. There could be all kinds of different things. There's definitely a lot of scope within the Guild Wars universe to do these things because we've heard of these worlds, but we know so little about them. There's still so many possibilities of what's going on there. However, your other question, what is the origin of each playable race in Guild Wars 2, does tie into this, and I'm sure you must have known this, otherwise you wouldn't have asked these two together. But the most interesting thing we've heard, really, about these other worlds is the fact that the humans that exist on Tyria aren't actually native to that Tyrian world. They were brought there by their gods. Humans are aliens on the planet that they exist on. Granted, this was thousands of years ago now, but when the humans first came to Tyria, they didn't live there. That's not where their race evolved. That's not where they were created. The gods had just brought them from one of these different worlds. A world we've not heard anything about, and anything could be happening there. It's just very, very cool for me to think of the fact that somewhere out there, while you're playing Guild Wars 2 and walking around, somewhere out there, far enough away, is another world inhabited by humans who potentially by this point could be living in an environment that's very similar to what you're finding here on Earth today with Earth-like cities. And you know, there's even scope there, and I wouldn't like it if they did this, but there's even scope there for ArenaNet to suggest that Earth actually does exist within the real Guild Wars universe, and that's where the humans come from. But there is scope there for that, and I think there are good sides and bad sides to having lore with so many holes as this. The good sides are definitely that you can let your imagination run wild, and you can think of all these different things and these amazing worlds and these different storylines that could potentially happen. Because the Mists, by the way, doesn't just allow you to travel to distant worlds, it can also allow you to travel to distant times. So there's all different plots that could end up going on there with travelling through the Mists and arriving on Tyria 20,000 years in the future or 20,000 years in the past, let alone just other worlds. So there is definitely a lot of scope there, and I think that's very nice for us to be able to imagine and be very creative. But also there are the downsides as well, which is where you have so little tangible knowledge about these things, I sometimes feel like it's a little bit weird speculating about it, because you can never really be sure the developers themselves are thinking the same questions or have got any plans for these other worlds, for example, themselves, which would be a shame if they didn't. But yeah, it's very, very interesting. I love the idea of the actual Tyrian physical universe versus the universe of the Mists and all these different worlds and the different things that could be happening. But I doubt we'll see it definitely in Guild Wars 2's launch. It could be many years before we get the answers to these kinds of questions, guys, unless there are some very intelligent NPCs with some cool information for us when the game comes out, and that is definitely the kind of stuff that this channel will be looking at once the game's out. But yeah, there you go, guys. Those are the questions for today. Thank you very much for watching. Today the next press beta begins as well, so I hope we all have a lot of fun watching all of the different footage and stuff. I know I will. And hey, maybe I'll be able to get something fresh for you guys. I have been asking a lot of permission from a lot of random people. Hey, can I use your Guild Wars 2 footage? And nobody's replied at all. So we're still with Guild Wars 2 Guru. Thank you so much to you guys for that. And I guess I'll see you guys next time.